The alien princess ordered the human to kneel before her throne, and for one breath, the whole crystal court waited to see whether Earth finally understood its place. Princess Valera of the luminous crown sat beneath 7 floating moons of glass, cold as starlight, beautiful as a blade, with the banners of Lysara falling around her like frozen fire. Nobles gathered in tiers of silver. Generals wore armor bright enough to blind servants. Priests burned violet incense for the old gods. And at the center of that impossible room stood one human in a rain-dark coat. Mud still dried on his boots, a broken field pack over one shoulder, number crown, no escort, no shining weapon, only the kind of silence that made soldiers remember trenches. His name had been announced as Elias Rowan, representative of the Terran Relief Compact. Nothing more, not lord, not admiral, not prince, just Elias Rowan. And that insulted Valera more than an army at her gates. Earth had been begged for fleets against the Voroin Dominion. Earth had been begged for saviors. Engineers, shield corps, generals with maps full of miracles. And Earth had answered by sending a single tired man. Valera had ruled 3 months in her father's absence. While the Western Front burned, while her mother slept in a healing crypt, while ministers smiled with blood behind their teeth, so she leaned forward, emerald eyes bright with pride that was really panic wearing jewels, and said, "Human, before you speak in the Hall of Dawns, kneel." No one moved. Not the court scribes, not the music drones, not the jeweled ambassadors from frightened planets. Even the fountains seemed to hold their water in the air. Elias Rowan looked at the floor as if measuring it for graves, then lifted his gaze to the princess. Not defiant, not afraid, only unbearably calm. He was older than Valera expected, with gray at the temples, a scar crossing his lower jaw, hands rough from labor rather than ceremony, and eyes that had watched too many suns set behind smoke. He did not bend. A murmur rushed through the court, offended and delighted because insult was entertainment in royal halls. General Kyer Voss, commander of the throne guards, stepped forward in polished white armor, his hand near the shock glaive at his side, and Valera almost smiled, because now the human would learn that mercy from royalty was optional. Obedience was not, but before Kyer could touch him, the first throne guard bowed, then the second. Then every guard along the eastern wall lowered weapon and knee. Armor striking marble like thunder in a chapel, General Kyer froze with his hand still half raised, and the court stopped breathing. The bowed guards were not young ceremonial boys. They were veterans, scarred under all that white enamel. Soldiers bred to obey the crown before blood. They had not bowed to visiting kings, not to archpriests, not even to Valera on the night of her coronation, because throne guards saluted standing. Yet now they knelt to a human who had not asked for anything. Elias shut his eyes, pain crossing his face so quickly she might have missed it if she had not spent her whole life reading enemies. He whispered, "Please do not do that, Captain Roll." The guard nearest him bowed lower, visor lifted, silver hair cut short above a face ruined by old burns, and said, "Forgive us, sir, but some debts outrank orders." That was the moment Princess Valera learned a throne can command bodies, but memory commands souls. The court erupted, nobles shouting treason, priests demanding explanation, ambassadors leaning forward with pale fascination. And Valera felt control slipping from her fingers like water through cracked glass. She rose from the throne, 22 years old, queen in all but name, ruler of a palace built to make doubt look illegal. And fury steadied her better than fear. "Human Elias Rowan," she said. "By what right do my throne guards bow to you?" Elias looked at the kneeling soldiers. "Not at her crown. By no right I wanted, your highness. Tell them to stand." She said. "I already did," he replied. "They do not always listen when they are ashamed." General Kyer turned on his own line. "Stand, in the name of the luminous crown." "Stand now." The guards obeyed slowly, but when they rose, their eyes remained fixed on the human with the grief of children seeing a grave reopened. Valera descended the 9 steps from her throne, each carved from comet bone, and stopped close enough to see dried blood on the cuff of his coat. Not fresh, not dramatic, simply ignored. My father said humans were useful because they died stubbornly. She said he said many things about many species. Elias answered, was he wrong? The old anger rose inside her, because every unknown word from this man felt like a door opening beneath her feet. Valera lifted her hand, and the hovering judgment mirror descended between them. A sheet of living glass that could read military identity marks through bone. State your service record, she ordered. The human looked at the mirror, then at the throne guards, and for the first time his calm cracked. No, he said. That single word struck harder than a weapon. General Kyer stepped in front of the princess, disgrace burning on his face. Refusal in the Hall of Dons is punishable by nerve binding. Elias looked at him with sadness. Kyer, your left knee locks when you overcommit. Do not make me prove I remember. The general went still. The princess noticed. Every soldier noticed, because no outsider should know the hidden weakness of the commander of her personal guard. Kyer swallowed. Sir, do not, sir, Valera repeated, tasting the word like poison. You call him sir, Kyer faced her slowly. Your Highness, at Fort Vere, before I entered your service. This man commanded the line that saved 200,000 Lyceron civilians. That was classified, snapped Lord Malvec from the ministerial dais. An old noble with rings on every finger and loyalty nowhere in his eyes. Valera turned to him. Classified from whom? From morale. Malvec answered too quickly. From the enemy, Elias said, or from guilt. The mention of Fort Vere struck the court like a hidden bomb. Valera knew the official story. The frontier moon had fallen to Vorwin raiders. Civilians evacuated under the heroic protection of the luminous Third Legion. Losses tragic, but honorable records, sealed because of enemy atrocities. She had been 17 then, grieving her brother. Too young to question reports written in royal ink, but now the throne guards looked like men and women who had eaten those reports and choked on them for years. Captain Ryle spoke before anyone could silence him. The Third Legion broke, Your Highness, not retreated. Not redeployed? Broke? Our commanders ordered gates sealed with civilians outside. The Vorowin came through the ash fields, children at the walls, mothers carrying oxygen masks, and we were told to protect equipment first. Valera felt the room tilt. Malvec shouted. Lies from traumatized soldiers. Elias turned his head only slightly, and Malvec flinched as if a gun had moved. I had 69 Terrans. For damaged haulers, no orbital cover. And a borrowed Lizaran translator that only knew funeral phrases, Elias said, we opened the gates. The Vorun expected us to run when their walkers crested the ridge. They always expect civilized people to prioritize survival. It makes them predictable. We used freight cranes as artillery, fuel pumps as mines, school buses as barricades, and every broadcast tower as a liar. We told the enemy the Terran Ninth had arrived. There was no Terran Ninth, there were cooks, medics, mechanics, pilgrims, refugee fathers with shaking hands, and throne guards who had been ordered not to open the doors. Captain Rial opened the first lock. Sergeant Eline opened the second. Kyer opened the West Service tunnel. You want to know why they bowed, Princess? They bowed because they remembered the people who crawled through fire while your empire pretended it had never locked them out. Rage came first, because rage was easier than shame. Valera spun toward Malvec. You sealed the record. The minister spread his jeweled hands. We were preserving the legitimacy of command during wartime. Children burned outside a military gate. The line had to hold somewhere, he said. Elias took one step, and every guard shifted as if a storm had taken human shape. The line held because human dock workers and your disobedient guards carried children through sewage culverts, while the Third Legion saved its banners. Do not call that command, and in the silence after that confession, the Empire began to remember what it had buried. Asterisk Valera lowered her hand. Judgment mirror. Access Fort Vere Command Archive. Malvec lunged forward. Your Highness? That archive was sealed by your father. Then my father should have sealed it better. She said. The mirror flashed. Codes raced through living glass. For a moment nothing happened. Then the hall filled with ghosts. Ash-colored projections flickering above the floor. Sirens screaming without sound. civilians pressed against fortress gates. Vorowin walkers crawling over the ridge like iron spiders. Lyceran commanders shouting evacuation denial, throne guards arguing, and a younger Elias Rowan climbing onto a burning transport and yelling through a broken speaker in terrible Lyceran, "Open the gates, or I will cut them open." The projection showed the lie without mercy. Humans falling from gunfire, Lysaran guards disobeying. Civilians pouring through tunnels, children handed over walls, and Elias carrying 2 infants while firing a flare pistol into the smoke. Behind them, a commander in 3rd Legion gold armor ordered orbital denial. The face under the helm was Lord Malvec's eldest son. Now a decorated fleet lord, Malvec struck the mirror controls. "But old guilt like sunlight once the lid is cracked," Valera whispered. "Why was I never told?" Elias answered. "Because someone decided you needed heroes more than truth." No one laughed now, and that frightened the guilty more than shouting. Valera felt the throne behind her like a mountain pressing on her spine. She had ordered this man to kneel, and now every step she had taken from childhood to crown seemed lined with people who had knelt in smoke so she could stand polished in ignorance. For one dangerous second, apology rose to her mouth, but Malvec moved faster. "Treason," he cried, not at the human, at the guards, at the mirror. At memory itself, he pointed toward Elias. "This man has manipulated royal troops, forged archives, insulted the crown, and brought foreign shame into our sacred hall. Arrest him." No one moved. Malvec looked to the outer palace guards, the ones under ministerial command. They raised pulse rifles. Valera saw it then. Not just panic, but preparation. Malvec had men in the hall. Too many, positioned near exits, near shield pillars, near the royal family crypt stairs. This was never only humiliation. She had summoned Earth. Malvec had planned to make the envoy bleed, blame Terran arrogance, and bury the Alliance before it could expose him. Elias saw it too, perhaps before anyone, because his hand was already inside his coat. Not reaching for a weapon, reaching for a small black transmitter. He pressed it once, and the fountains died. The music drones dropped, the incense vents shut, and every decorative moon above the throne hall changed from silver to red. "Emergency mode," Kyre barked, confused. The palace accepted his code. Malvec shouted. "Impossible," Elias said. "Fort Vare survivors built half your refugee shield network." "Minister, did you think they never upgraded the palace doors?" The second betrayal began with a whisper from a human who sounded disappointed. Not surprised the outer guards fired, but the throne guards were already moving. Not as ceremony, not as royal furniture, but as soldiers who remembered mud. White armor collided with ministerial black. Shock glaives flashed. Nobles screamed beneath tables of crystal fruit. Valera felt Kyre pull her behind the throne steps as a pulse bolt shattered the air where her head had been. For the first time in her life, the Hall of Dawns did not look eternal. It looked like a room full of exits. Cover sightlines, fire angles, and civilians. Exactly as the human had probably seen it from the moment he entered. Elias did not fight beautifully. He fought like a tired man doing necessary work. He shoved a priest out of a firing lane, kicked a fallen rifle under a pillar, slammed an attacker into the judgment mirror hard enough to crack history across his armor, then dragged a wounded page behind the fountain base. He did not kill when disabling was enough. Did not spare when sparing would cost innocent lives. Every movement carried arithmetic. Who is exposed, who can run, who must be stopped now. 3 ministerial guards broke toward the royal crypt stairs, where Valera's mother lay helpless in cold healing light. Elias saw them through his transmitter to Kyre. Vaulted over the broken mirror, took one rifle blast across the shoulder, and still reached the stairs first. His body hit the lead guard like a falling door. The second raised a blade toward Ilias's spine, and Captain Ryle shot the attacker through the wrist. Crying, "Not him, not again." Valera understood then. Her guards were not choosing the human over the crown. They were choosing the crown they wished had existed at Fort Vare. Malvec fled toward the western balcony with 2 loyal officers. Robes gathered like a coward gathering excuses. Valera rose despite Kyre pulling her back. "I am your princess," she snapped. "Either guard me forward, or explain to history why you carried me backward." Kyre hesitated, then bowed once to her and gave her a compact shield disc. She ran, crown heavy, dress tearing at the knee. Passing servants huddled beneath benches and nobles praying to gods they had bribed for years. Elias was still fighting by the crypt stairs, shoulders smoking, jaw clenched. He saw her moving into danger and shouted, "Princess, down!" She ignored him and hurled the shield disc at Malvek's path. It opened mid-air into a blue wall, cutting him off from the balcony. Malvek spun, face twisted. "You stupid girl. You have no idea what I preserved." Valera drew her dagger. "I know what you buried." He lifted a hidden pulse ring, and Elias, bleeding from the shoulder, threw himself between them. The blast hit him in the ribs and drove him to one knee. The court saw it, the guard saw it, Valera saw it. The human had finally knelt in the Hall of Dawns. Not because she commanded it, but because someone had tried to kill her. Malvek smiled in triumph. "Kneel," he spat. "All creatures kneel, eventually." Elias lifted his head, blood at his mouth. "Humans kneel, minister. We kneel beside the wounded. We kneel to lift children. We kneel to bury our dead. We do not kneel for men who mistake height for honor." Then he surged upward, caught Malvek's ring hand, broke 2 jeweled fingers, and drove him into the shield wall. Valera placed her dagger at Malvek's throat, by authority of the luminous crown. "I arrest Lord Malvek for treason, murder, falsification of wartime record, and conspiracy against the Terran envoy." Malvek laughed through pain. "Arrest me, and the outer fleets will not answer you." "Princess, they answer my son, and he answers the Vorowin." The words froze the victory before it could breathe. Across the red emergency moons, a new projection unfolded. Palace defense grid, orbital perimeter, fleet signatures blooming like wounds around the capital. Vorowin Dominion vessels emerged from stealth at the edge of the inner moon shield, escorted by Lizeron cruisers wearing royal codes. Malvek's son had brought the enemy through the gates of heaven. The court started screaming again, but quieter this time, because betrayal from within has a colder voice than attack from without. Valera looked at the defense display and felt every lesson she had studied turn useless. The Crown fleet was compromised. Shield towers understaffed, city evacuation routes incomplete, and her throne guards trapped in a hall full of nobles who had never carried their own luggage. Ilias wiped blood from his mouth, stared at the display, and said, "How many civilians in the capital ring?" Valera answered automatically. 12 million registered, likely 15 with refugees. He looked at Kyre tunnels. Kyre nodded. Old service and irrigation lines. Half sealed, Elias looked back to Valera. "Who controls public broadcast?" "I do," she said. "Not your ministers? Not anymore." Elias took command without asking for it. And strangely, Valera did not stop him. Not because she surrendered authority, but because he used every order to push authority back into useful shape. Seal the hall. Identify ministerial units. Separate civilians from armed personnel. Open refugee channels 3, 7, and 12. Tell the city to move low. Not wide Vorowin target crowds, not tunnels. Shut down the ceremonial light grid. It is drawing power from shield capacitors. Send palace engineers to flood the lower heat exchangers. We can make steam cover over the southern avenues. The Empire had lost its mask. Now it needed a spine. Valera grabbed the broadcast circlet from the throne arm and set it on her brow, its needles biting into her skin. The court saw blood bead at her temples, and for once no one looked away. She opened every public screen in the capital. "People of Lysara," she said, "this is Princess Valera. The Vorowin are inside our sky because traitors open the way. Hear me clearly, do not gather beneath banners. Do not run to plazas. Enter the old tunnels. Follow throne guard signals. Carry children first. Carry strangers if you must. The palace is not safe. The palace is not sacred. Living people are sacred. Move now." Elias glanced at her, and for the first time there was something like respect in his eyes. Then the first orbital strike hit the outer palace shield. The hall shook, crystal moons shattered, raining red glass over marble, Elias pushed Valera under the curve of the throne back, taking cuts across his cheek and hands. She shoved him off. "I can stand," he said. "Then stand where standing helps, not where pride sparkles." A second strike hit, and the floor split down the center, revealing maintenance dark beneath the Hall of Dawns. Through the broken ceiling hung the Vorowin flagship, vast and black, shaped like a hooked crown. Its broadcast pierced every channel. "Princess Valera, purged heir of a failing line, surrender the human and abdicate, and your capital will be processed with minimal agony." The voice belonged to Warlord Karun, eater of frontier moons, executioner of Fort Vayer. The monster from the archive made flesh. Every survivor in the Hall of Dawns turned toward Elias Rowan. Because the Vorowin had not demanded the crown, not the fleet, not the shield codes. They had demanded him. Valera looked at him slowly. "What did you do to them?" Elias stared up through the shattered ceiling. "I taught them fear could learn new names." He said. Kyre whispered. "Fort Vayer was not the last time." "Was it no?" Elias answered. "It was the first time they learned my face." Malvek, pinned and guarded, began laughing. "You still do not understand, Princess. Earth did not send you a diplomat. Earth sent the man to Vorowin called the Gate Ash, the one who broke their harvest cycles, the one who turned slave worlds into rebellion zones, the one they promised to skin in front of every throne." Elias looked annoyed. "I asked Terran Command not to use that title." The tired man Valera had ordered to kneel was not an insult from Earth. He was a warning delivered in human form. Karun's second broadcast rolled through the hall. "Elias Rowan, kneel and surrender before the royal child, and I will leave one district breathing." The human ignored the monster and looked at Valera. "I need permission to use your palace as bait. Explain," she said. "The Vorowin think symbols matter because they enjoy breaking them. If your throne remains lit, they will focus fire here. Buying time for evacuation, we make them think command is still inside while we move defense control to the old waterworks." "What about us?" asked a noble. Elias looked at him. "You can help carry the wounded or become something the wounded climb over. Choose quickly." Valera removed her crown, heavy with star diamonds, and placed it on the throne. The court gasped, because the crown had not left royal flesh during a crisis in 1,000 years. She said, "Let them shoot the chair." Then she turned to Elias. "Use it." That was when the princess stopped protecting the image of rule and began practicing the burden of it. They moved through the split floor into service tunnels older than the palace songs. Valera leading with the broadcast circlet, Elias limping beside her. Kyre and the throne guards forming a living shell around civilians. Wounded nobles, terrified pages, priests who no longer knew which prayers were useful, and servants who knew every hidden passage because servants always know the true shape of power. Above them, the Hall of Dawns blazed with false command signals. The empty throne shining under the crown, drawing Vorowin fire like a martyr. Each strike shook dust from the tunnel roof, and each time someone screamed. Elias answered with a task. "Count heads, pass water. Brace that beam, keep left hand on the wall. Tie the children together by sleeves. No one gets lost if no one lets go." Valera watched fear become motion around him, not vanish, never vanish, but harden into something that could carry itself. She had given speeches to armies. But Elias gave frightened people instructions small enough to obey, and somehow that saved more courage than poetry. At the first junction, they found civilians trapped behind a collapsed gate. Cooks, gardeners, clerks, musicians. Children in festival clothes because the court had insisted on pretending the war was far away. The gate mechanism was dead, and behind them, Vorowin insertion pods screamed down through the palace roof. Elias asked if her broadcast circlet could reach maintenance drones. Valera said, "In theory," he said. "Then lie to the machine if you must." She summoned hundreds of tiny gold-cleaning drones, beetles made to polish floors for nobles. And Elias rerouted them into the locking gears. They burned, sparked, and died. The gate lifted 1/2 meter, enough for people to crawl. Elias dropped to his knees beside the gap and lifted children through one by one. and every time someone thanked him, he said, "Thank her." She opened it. The words struck Valera harder than accusation. Because he gave her credits she did not feel she deserved. She knelt beside him and began pulling civilians through. A small child stared at her dusty face and whispered, "Are you the princess?" Valera said, "I am." The child asked, "Are we still losing?" Valera found no royal answer. That was not a lie. Elias said, "We are still moving, little star. Losing is what happens after people stop moving." Then Vorowin's shock troops breached the tunnel mouth. Black armor unfolding like insects, throne guards formed a shield wall. Too few and too packed with civilians to maneuver. Elias looked at Kyre oil lines in the ceiling. Kyre said, "For ceremonial firefalls." Elias stared. "Your people built fire waterfalls under a palace?" Kyre almost smiled. "Nobility likes drama." "Then give them some." Valera opened the valves. Kyre sparked the mist. Blue fire roared across the roof. The guards held, civilians crawled, and nobles learned to carry the wounded. And somewhere under the burning palace, the court learned that survival is the oldest form of loyalty. They reached the waterworks as the palace above them died in pieces. Shields collapsing, towers breaking, old victory songs buried under emergency alarms. The chamber was vast, a forgotten cathedral of pipes, reservoirs, turbines, and green maintenance light. Built before the Empire learned to hide useful things beneath beautiful ones. From there, defense lines could be rerouted. City gates opened, tunnel maps broadcast, and planetary shields pulsed long enough for civilian ships to launch. Valera took the central control dais, while Elias leaned against a pipe. Pressing one hand to his burned ribs, she saw how pale he had become. Human blood marked half the tunnel behind them. "Sit," she ordered. He ignored her. "Sit." She said again, not as princess, as someone tired of watching him pretend pain was an administrative detail. Elias slid down the pipe with a grunt. "Better," Valera said. He gave her a faint, surprised smile. "You command better when you stop performing command." The defense grid came alive under her hands. She sent false royal signals from the ruined throne. Evacuation maps to every public screen, shield pulses over refugee districts. An open landing clearance to civilian ships hiding under freight licenses. Kyre coordinated throne guards across the city. Old Fort Vea survivors activating networks they had built quietly for years. Because shame had made them better guardians than pride ever had. Elias listened, eyes half closed. "Catching errors before they became deaths, not Plaza 7, he said. "Vorowin will herd them there, use laundry tunnels. Tell ships not to launch in groups, singles only. Dark engines until cloud cover, do not defend the statue bridges. Blow them after refugees pass, statues do not need rescue. People do." Then Karun found them. The waterworks ceiling exploded inward. Black insertion spears drilling through stone and pipe. Steam blasting across the chamber, guards forming ranks. Civilians scattering into drainage alcoves. And from the largest, spear-stepped warlord Karun, 3 meters of armored cruelty, antlered helm, wet with chemical rain. Cloak woven from enemy standards. His voice filled the chamber without speakers. Elias Rowan, Gate Ash, Grave Rat of Earth, still crawling through tunnels with children? Elias opened his eyes. Looks like it keeps working. Karun's gaze shifted to Valera, Little Crown. Your minister sold me your sky for 3 border systems and a promise that his bloodline would govern the ashes. He lied poorly, but greed is a useful translator. Valera lifted her chin. You will leave my world, Karun laughed. Worlds do not belong to the frightened. They belong to those strong enough to make others kneel. Elias stood slowly despite his wounds. No, he said. They belong to those who stay after the strong leave graves behind. Karun drew a blade made of black light, and every soldier in the chamber felt the temperature drop. The warlord pointed it at Elias Neal, human. Before I peel the princess apart and make your mercy watch. Valera raised a rifle, but Elias touched the barrel down. He stepped forward into the open, wounded, smaller, absurdly breakable beneath that monstrous figure, and said, Karun of the Vorowin, butcher of Vare, breaker of harvest law, oath killer, child taker. By authority of no empire and every grave you left unmarked. I accept your challenge, Kyre whispered, sir. You can barely stand, Elias said. Then I will stand efficiently. The duel was not elegant. It was ugly, fast, and cruel. Karun had reach, armor, strength, and a blade that cut stone like cloth. Elias had a stolen rifle, a broken shoulder, hidden knives, and the human talent for turning disadvantage into geometry. He moved through steam, pipes, chains, and stairs. Using the chamber as a second body, Karun cut through a turbine. Elias vented boiling water into his side. Karun smashed a platform. Elias rode the collapse beneath his guard. For half a minute they vanished inside vapor. Metal screaming, boots slipping, breath tearing. Then Elias staggered out, bleeding from the scalp. Karun followed, laughing. You are slower, old human, Elias spat blood. You are louder, old monster. Valera saw the truth. Civilians still evacuating. Shields failing, guards pinned, Elias losing strength, and the northern reservoir release across the chamber if opened. It would blind Vorowin, targeting, and hide civilian launches. But whoever pulled it might not return. Old royalty would order someone else to pay that price. Valera pressed the broadcast circlet into an engineer's hands and ran. That was the moment the princess realized courage is not the absence of terror. It is terror, given work to do, Kyre shouted after her. Elias turned. Saw her crossing the chamber, and for the first time truly looked afraid. Princess No Karun saw the fear and smiled. Because monsters always think love is a handle, he pivoted toward Valera, blade rising. Elias slammed into him from behind, both crashing into flooded lower steps. Blacklight carving sparks from stone, Valera ran past, boots splashing. Lungs burning, hands shaking, she reached the manual release. A wheel taller than her shoulders. Rusted from decades of neglect, she pulled nothing. She pulled again, muscles tearing, still nothing behind her. Elias screamed as Karun's blade cut through his coat and into his side. Not surrender, just a body reaching its limit. Valera set both hands on the wheel and shouted, I am Valera Arnth, daughter of a flawed crown. Heir to a wounded empire, and I command you to move. The wheel groaned, perhaps from pressure. Perhaps from ancient engineering, perhaps because this time command came with blood on its palms. It turned, the reservoir opened like a god exhaling. Steam thundered through the chamber. Vorowin, targeting beams scattered, orbital fire went blind. Civilian launch lights rose across the city in dozens. Then hundreds. Small ships slipping through cloud and ash, carrying children, elders, strangers, songs, recipes, languages, futures. Valera was thrown from the platform into waist-deep water. Karun roared as boiling vapor hammered his troops. Elias used that roar to drive a broken pipe through the gap in the warlord's armor. Karun stumbled, not dead, but finally uncertain. Kyre and the throne guards closed behind him, not bowing now. Standing. Captain Roll fired a grappling line through Carowin's blade arm. Sergeant Eline hit the knee joint. Kyre drove his glaive into the warlord's chest plate, and Elias, almost falling, took Valera's short blade and placed its point under Karun's helm. This is for Vaer, he said, then stopped. The whole chamber waited. Kill him, someone shouted. Many voices joined. Kill him, kill him. The Vorowin warlord knelt in boiling mist, and Valera saw the shape of her first command return to her like judgment. Kneel, she had said to Elias, and now the monster knelt before them. Powerless enough to execute, guilty enough to deserve it. Elias's hand shook around the blade, not with weakness alone, but with memory. Valera stepped beside him. What happens if he lives? She asked. He answers for every world he touched, Elias said. If your courts are strong enough to hold truth. He looked at her then, not as envoy, not as legend, but as a man who had spent his life deciding which parts of himself to burn so others would not have to. Valera took the blade from him. Karun laughed wetly. Mercy, little crown, for me, no, Valera said. Trial, mercy, is about who we are. Trial is about what you did. She looked to Kyre. Bind him. Broadcast him. Let every world see that we do not hide monsters in sealed archives anymore. The throne guards obeyed, and this time no one questioned whose command they followed. Above them, Earth ships arrive late by royal standards, precisely on time by human ones, not shining fleets, but rugged carriers. Repair barges, missile frigates, hospital vessels, and ugly destroyers with names painted by hand. They came through the blind steam bloom, broadcasting in a dozen languages. Refugee corridors marked, hostile vessels bracketed. Lasaran loyalists identify green, traitors identify silence, the Vorowin, expecting a frightened empire and one wounded human, found themselves inside a city that had become a trap. The battle lasted 19 hours by dawn. Malvec's son was captured after Earth broadcast the Fort Vare archive across every loyal ship. 3 Lysaran cruisers turned their guns on the Vorowin flagship from shame as much as strategy. And a Terran destroyer named Old Argument rammed Karun's command vessel until it could no longer flee. The Vorowin spear broke before noon. Not ended, wars rarely give clean endings, but broken enough for the capital to breathe, broken enough for 15 million people to learn that survival had come from every hand that refused to let go. When Valera returned to the ruined Hall of Dawns, the moons were shattered, the fountains cracked, the throne scorched black where the crown had melted into its armrest. Civilians stood among nobles now. Servants, children, engineers, soldiers. People once forbidden from that floor. Valera looked at the throne. It had survived enough to remain a chair and failed enough to cease being a god. Protocol can wait, she said. Truth cannot. Then she ordered the Fort Vare archive unsealed publicly. All of it. Names of the dead. The cowards, the disobedient, and the ones who stayed. Elias woke 3 days later in the Royal Healing Wing and immediately tried to leave, which convinced Valera that human legends were mostly stubborn patients with terrible timing. She found him on the edge of a medical bed, bandaged, pale, and already wearing his boots while 3 healers threatened restraint. You are difficult to keep alive. She said, your healers are aggressive, he answered. They say you corrected their triage order in your sleep. Were they wrong? No. He nodded as if that settled everything. She stepped inside. Uncertain, in a way no battlefield had made her. I owe you an apology. Elias looked toward the rain-streaked window. You owe one to your people first. I gave it publicly. Good. Then I owe you one too. Valera had prepared royal words, balanced and useless. They died before reaching her tongue. I was afraid, she said. I thought if I made you kneel, everyone would see Earth as a tool, not a judge. Elias studied her. Fear is information, not shame. Pride is what gets people killed after fear tries to warn them. My guards bowed to you before me, she said. That hurt, I know. They did not bow because they loved me more. They bowed because I was standing where their guilt lived. Give them somewhere better to put it later. When Captain Riel and Kyre entered and began to bow, Eli snapped, Do not. Valera raised a hand. Kneel only if you are helping someone rise. The soldiers looked at her, and something heavy loosened in their faces. A week later, there was no victory parade. Only the reading of names, Lysaron names, Terran names, servant names, noble names, child names, and Karun, Malvec, and their conspirators were tried under civilian witness law. Not hidden, not erased, Valera spoke without music. My first order to the Terran envoy was to kneel, she said. I believed authority was something others lowered themselves before. I was wrong. Authority is what remains after comfort kneels to duty. After pride kneels to truth, after the powerful kneel beside the wounded and ask how to lift. My throne guards bowed before the human because he stood with them when our crown did not. I will not punish that loyalty. I will spend my reign trying to deserve it. Captain Riel stepped forward, not planned, and knelt beside a small girl whose mother had died in the tunnels, tying her loosened shoe with burned hands. One by one, other guards knelt too, helping the wounded sit, lifting old men, repairing stretchers. And when Valera descended to carry a stretcher herself, the sound that rose was not applause. It was the first rough breath of a people deciding not to abandon one another. Elias left Lasara 2 months later. After the tunnels became public shelters and the throne guards changed their oath to protect the living trust that gives the crown meaning. Valera met him at the rainport and gave him a piece of the melted crown. Not as reward, she said, as witness. So you remember us? Elias closed his hand around it. I remember everyone that was the problem and the promise of him. Valera said, when you arrived, I thought Earth had sent me one man instead of a fleet. Elias looked toward the Terran destroyers. Earth sent both. Princess, you just met the fleet later. She laughed softly, then grew serious. If I ordered you to kneel now? He gave her a tired look. I would tell Kyre your left flank is open and leave before the argument got dramatic. She smiled despite herself. Then Valera did something no protocol covered. She knelt, not in surrender, not in worship, but on one knee, on the wet landing stone, before the human, before her general, before the waking sky. Elias stiffened. Princess, do not. She looked up at him. I am not kneeling to you, Elias Rowan. I am kneeling to the dead, to the dead. To the truth I inherited too late, and to the work of rising better. Around them, the rain fell. Kyre bowed his head. Not from shame this time, from peace. Elias stood very still, then lowered himself carefully to one knee across from her. Wounded ribs making the motion slow. Then I kneel to the living, he said, and to the promise that we stop making graves necessary. For a moment, no empire stood above anyone. No alien crown, no human legend, only 2 tired survivors kneeling in the rain. Trying to build a future that would not demand so many heroes years later. When children in rebuilt Lysera asked why the statue in the Hall of Dawns showed no king, no queen, no conqueror. Only a throne guard tying a child's shoe while a crownless princess held a stretcher. And a human stood in the background pointing toward an exit. Their teachers told them the story. They told how Princess Valera ordered the human to kneel, how her throne guards bowed first, how truth broke open like a sealed wound, how a palace fell but the people moved, how a monster knelt and was not hidden, how a crown melted and became witness instead of ornament. And they told the children that humans were not magical, not fearless, not noble in every hour. But when power demanded worship, they asked who was trapped. When pride demanded silence, they opened the archive. When monsters demanded surrender, they looked for tunnels. And when someone ordered them to kneel, they often did, but only beside the wounded. Only beside the dead. Only beside the small hands reaching up from smoke. Then they stood, and somehow worlds stood with them.